What are the commonalities among leaders who sustain excellence over an extended period of time?
I want to acknowledge something first. So it's kind of rare to get a chance to meet one of your literary heroes, and oftentimes they tell you that you shouldn't because you're probably going to be let down. You have these expectations that are actually not really realistic for a human being. So when I got a chance to hang out with you a few times, I think first when we were both doing a thing for Skillsoft on separate days, so we met up for dinner and drinks, which was awesome. And then, when he asked me to come back to hang out with you guys and the leaders with the Cleveland Indians, now Cleveland Guardians, just amazing. I have to say, just publicly acknowledge, Dan, I'm so grateful for me to get a chance to meet one of my favorite writers, and you end up being an even better dude than I thought was possible. So it's one of those moments where you're like, hey, actually, sometimes you should, and it actually exceeds your expectations. And that's the case with you, man.
That's really nice. Thank you. I appreciate that, Brian. It's really been fun getting to know you and getting to know your story and seeing your impact on people. I mean, I've been a lot of these podcast things or other media like this, and yours is one that I've had three different people. One guy in my neighborhood, somebody who I knew back in Alaska, somebody else saying, "I heard you on that. It was really like that show." And so, anyway, you're having a big impact, and it's cool to see these energy and ideas kind of bouncing around in the world.
Isn't it neat when you see your work in the wild? So, for example, because I don't know if you. With the culture code now, it's probably so normal that it's not even cool anymore. It's just like, oh, that's just normal. But like, let's say you're in an airport and you see somebody reading your book. Like, is that still cool for you? Like, how does that feel?
1,000%. Yeah.
Is it?
It's neat. It's neat. And it really for me, it sort of spotlights this space between, the ideas of the book and people. And it's like, there are these interactions that are happening in that space that are really unpredictable and really interesting. It's not like everyone just uses it like a quick startup guide for a DVR or something like that. It's just like, no, it's hitting people in different ways, and different groups are taking it in different ways. And so that's just endlessly neat, because it has to do with, this space and this interface where somebody's in a situation, they have a problem, and then there's some idea that they can grab onto, some toolkit, and interesting stuff happens.
It's so cool, and it's like one of the greatest networking tools ever. I know with the work you do with the Guardians baseball team now, that you're like the guy who brings a lot of things together for their learning and development group, and I'm grateful you introduced them to me. But what I want to talk about is a couple of things today. One, obviously the culture code and kind of the playbook written off of that. When you see this cover, like, how does it make you feel to look and see the culture playbook book cover?
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun. This is, to see, the culture code came out 3 or 4 years ago. And so this idea of like, there was this hunger for like, oh yeah, we want to have like just some takeaways, right? Some simple. And when I started, I thought it was going to be pretty simple, right? I'm going to take take the best of what great groups are doing and make kind of a cookbook, right? And then as I got into it, and obviously the pandemic and everything we've lived through, there was this sense of it all kind of evolving into something different. Like, it started in one place, like so many projects, right? You know this feeling. So many projects starts, I got a really clear idea of where I'm going. And then you go, and the journey turns you left and right and backwards and forwards. And so we ended up with a book that's much more like sort of a workbook or an interactive experience that's trying to create a lot of reflection for people, and trying to kind of occupy this space, right? And trying to get people, what do people need right now? And, the world is so filled with action. The world is so many things to do. And yet we've got this moment that we've been given the last couple of years where we can kind of pull back and zoom out and sort of ask these bigger questions. And so it is like a culture playbook, but I kind of think of it kind of functions like a culture pause book. Like, what do we need to zoom out, stop, and reflect together about who we want to be and how we want to work together? And here's some good models, maybe some ideas from great cultures you can copy. Here's some questions you might want to ponder as a group. And so that whole idea that like pausing is really productive. Pausing is when the great things happen. Pausing is the thing we're kind of least good at doing in some ways in our work. And yet it's sort of the most powerful thing you can do, to sort of stop and say, wait a minute, what do we look like at our best? Like, what does that really look like? What's stopping that from happening? Like, why can't we do that every single day? Those sorts of questions end up being really kind of powerful launching pads.
I feel like you're really good at this in your own life. When we were having dinner, we talked about, I think, some other writers and people who are kind of at your similar level, have sold tons of books. And one of the things, though, that you didn't seem to be in too much of a hurry. You go to Alaska every summer with your family, which I love. I've loved learning about that. I know what I asked about before we started, because I think it's so cool that you do that. You seem to be very relaxed in the office when we were meeting for half a day. Like, in a way, like, I admire that. It's like, this dude is comfortable in his own skin. He seems to have figured some things out about life. You know, like, he still works really hard and produces great stuff, but isn't like, you're with your family, like, you seem to have your priorities in order. Like, can you walk me through your mindset of how you view almost living like a pretty cool life and not killing yourself, even though I'm sure you could be on the speaker circuit just absolutely crushing it if you wanted. Instead, you just take a speech here, a speech there, you go to Alaska. You know, can you share more about that?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. It's been sort of an instinctive set of decisions that have led me to that, and not to not to completely, but there are definitely times during my life where I have been the guy who doesn't, who in the NFL, analogy would be sleeping under your desk and waking up and going back and looking at more film. Like, that's definitely happened at times. But no, there's just always been kind of a clarity around, the sort of value of family. And I guess it's because I've made those mistakes of sort of thinking, like, there's some areas of life. There's this really interesting distinction that I've been thinking a lot about lately. It's between things that are complicated and things that are complex. And like, things that are complicated have got this sort of linear cause and effect. If A, it's like Legos, right? If A goes to B, goes to C, goes to D. If I want to, get fit, I should lift weights. I should work out more, right? There's like linear cause and effect. And that is some areas of life that's really true. But there's the most meaningful areas of life are not like that. They're more complex. Like, that's where there's not like linear cause and effect, where instead you're kind of like, and it sounds sort of woo-woo to say, but you're kind of like in these, you're sort of moving toward these things. In complexity theory, they call them attractors. And like, you're probing and doing experiments and seeing what works. And you can't like build it like Legos, right? That's the thing about things. And the most important things in life are sort of complex, like your family and your relationship to your kids, your relationship to your community and all that stuff. And so in that area, and so in certain areas, you want to be like, okay, we're going to optimize and maximize. We're going to optimize and maximize these things. But when it comes to like these big things of like, what relationships do I want to have in life? Don't try to optimize or actimize. Has been sort of the takeaway I've had, where it's like, do an experiment and see what works. And then like play with that and see what emerges. And you're much more of an explorer. You're much more of an experimenter trying to do these. Like, when we started doing this Alaska thing, my wife's from Ohio, I'm from Alaska. We lived in Alaska for 15 years. And we did this experimental year where it was like, my son's getting into high school, let's live in Ohio for a year. And we did. And certain things about that were really interesting and great. Was it perfect? No. Was it like the Lego complicated answer? No. It was hard. It was weird. It was difficult, but there were enough about it that was kind of an attractor that we like kind of stayed with it. And we evolved this sort of thing. It was the same thing with my relationship with the Cleveland Guardians. Like, ooh, there's something cool there. Like, there's some really interesting people. There's some really interesting projects. I could like speak at a different place every week and be gone all the time. Or these guys are right down the road from me. Like, they're 15-minute drive from when we live in Ohio. Like, I could go down there every Thursday afternoon. Let's see what that happens. So And I think when everybody reflects on like the best stuff in their life, I think it comes from this more like exploration place, not the, I have the answer, I know the answer, if then, like if I do this, then I will be happy. Like that's always a mistake. So this concept of like I'm sure in your own life, like when you started this podcast, you didn't have any clarity. You had an attractor,
Right.
That was like, I kind of want to go here. Let's see what happens. And then some cool stuff happened and you amplified that. Right.
Right.
And I think most of the good things in life come out of that sort of process where you're not sort of using a cookbook and just plug and play. You're like you're playing in a different way. You're playing in this area that's in more of a conversational way. Like I'm going to try something, then the world's going to talk back to me. And I'm going to say, oh, that's terrible. Let's not do that. Or this is interesting. Let's do more of that.
It's like relationships. It's hard to hack or optimize them. I think they just have to happen. I think about time with your kids. You can't try to sometimes you just have to be, right? Like be present. You go on the car ride to the volleyball tournament. You're in the hotel. You're waiting between whatever it may be. Like you're just being in like those little moments. That's when relationships get built. But it's not like, okay, we have to plan 17 trips and go here and go here. It's like it's all the in-between stuff is the stuff, is what builds things. Same thing with building a podcast. I committed to following my curiosity with great rigor. That was it, right? I'm gonna reach out to people that I admire, that I think could tell compelling stories that I'm first and foremost curious about, and maybe others would be too. And maybe then those people would want to follow along. And then again, it kind of works. And then you double down and triple down and say, okay, here we go. But still remember, like, what was the general impetus for doing it in the first place and staying true to that. So I could talk about this stuff about with you, Dan, all day. I want to let's dive into some culture stuff. So first and foremost, what do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions about culture?
Yeah, no, it's a huge one. It's a lesson that we're continually learning, and we've learned it really, really vividly over the last couple of years, right? I'd say number one is that if you get, there's a misconception that successful cultures are happy places. Huge misconception. You sort of think from the outside, oh man, Pixar, like if I walked into Pixar, I would just see people having these idea-filled meetings and every idea would be good. And every film they produced would be great. And every person there would therefore be like fulfilled and happy all the time, walking around on a cloud. That is definitely not true. Like when you go there, there's a happiness, but it's a different kind of happiness. I describe it in the book a little bit as deep fun. And this idea of deep fun is where you're sort of solving hard problems with people you admire. And you're getting real. Like you're not having relationship conflict, you're having task conflict is what it's called, where you're seeing if the best idea can win. You're trying to have these, you're bringing up tensions and you're turning toward those tensions together and saying, what's really the best thing we can do here? Like, tell me if I need help, like help me out with this. This is not as good as it can be. I need you to poke holes in it. I need you to make it better. And then I'll make it better too. And we'll gather around it. And that's like this shared reflex that I think great cultures have, because when a problem comes up, or even when an opportunity comes up, there's sometimes a tendency to turn away from it. Like, let's just do business as usual. Like, it's a Tuesday, I'm comfortable, you're comfortable. Let's just do our job and get out. But when something new happens, what happens? Is there a reflex to like turn toward it together and say, well, that's not good. Like what are we gonna do about this? And that's, I think, what strong cultures have. And that experience of gathering around a problem, shoulder to shoulder, and like struggling with it and making mistakes and making it better and making more mistakes and making it better. It's a very particular kind of fun. And I think that is the kind of deep fun that you find at these places. So that's to me, that's the huge misconception, because we sort of are always thinking that, oh, if we get to that happy place, we're going to be on a higher plane now, you know.
Doing
That's,
hard things together. I learned that through athletic endeavors. I had high school coaches who studied military leaders. They actually are some of them are from there. Went to school there. Obviously, you spent time with Navy SEALs. I think doing hard things together and being able to look left and right that we did this hard thing together then can lead to an amazing culture. I'm curious, though. I was rereading the Pixar section of Culture Code last night, and fascinated by Ed Catmull. What are some of the amazing things or most useful things you say you've learned from spending time at Pixar and time with Ed Catmull?
a bunch of things. I mean, you know, he's unbelievable at being open about the mistakes they made. You know, I tell the story in the book that he'll just sort of say, yeah, we made a huge mistake building this building. It's probably a $20 million building, and he's counting the mistakes. And the thing that I really appreciated from him is a few things. One was how patient he was. Like, he really, there was a time where they sort of have, each movie creates a project team in Pixar. And so you have a project team that's just like, if there's a movie about Scotland, like they're visiting Scotland and learning about Scotland history. And he watches those teams and he waits for something cool to happen. And there was a time where one of his teams, they were doing something with the outdoors, and they pitched a tent. One day they pitched a tent like in the office as part of an experiment. And he was so pleased with that. He couldn't force them to do stuff, but whenever they did anything, he would spotlight it, amplify it, and he was so delighted. So he had this, like, as a creative leader, to sort of equip them with this project and equip them with this idea. And his favorite phrase is, now it's up to you. Isn't that a good phrase? Because it's like, he'll sort of equip you, and then he'll say, now, Ryan, it's up to you. And it's, so they've got the ownership. And then when they do something that is worthy, that is like showing, that's creating, I mean, in complexity theory, creating an attractor, like this tent, right? It's going to attract all kinds of interesting ideas and creativity. And then celebrating it. So this immense patience to sort of say, I can't force these people to be creative, right? I can't make it happen. I can seed the clouds, you know, like cloud seeding. And then when like lightning strikes, I can say, hey, look at that. That's pretty cool. And I can celebrate that around the company. So that was another one. And I guess the other thing is that he really had a backbone of humility. He always was aware that there was things going on that he didn't know. He always knew that projects had a way of going off the rails, or the creative people can sometimes be very difficult to deal with. And he was really, really humble about that. And I think that combination, like, you know, when we think of leaders, we often have this cultural baggage, this idea of a leader as an admiral, the leader as this bold, strong, kind of masculine presence that knows things we don't, can see things we can't, and then tells us what to do. Like that authoritative model of a leader. And what I kept seeing at these places, and Catmull is perfectly representative of this, is a really different model of a leader. Much more humble, much more patient, much more of a teammate, actually. It's like they're not thinking about, Catmull doesn't walk around thinking, I'm the leader, I need to say something well. The power's not with him. The power's with, how can I support my team? That's really the question on his mind. And I think, given the way the world is changing, like if we've learned anything in the last few years, it's that, like, if someone says they're a great leader, like that's a huge red flag. If someone starts acting like a great leader, that's a huge red flag. Go to Netflix right now. What are the movies people are watching? WeWork, The Dropout, Elizabeth Holmes, Theranos, Travis Kalanick at Uber. All of them are the same story. It's somebody who said, it's me. It's me. I've got the answers. I've got a new way of doing things. I'm different. And this takes you on a path, as those movies and stories and case studies so vividly show, a path of making mistakes, a path of hubris, a path of toxicity, a path of ego. And what you find in good cultures is a really different backbone of humility. You find a bunch of catmull. You find people who are saying, I don't have the answer. Now it's up to you. Like, can you help me figure it out?
Have you ever studied Elon Musk?
No, not up close. I think he's kind of a fascinating guy.
What do you think about that? Because there's a little bit of this, like, I can fix Twitter, and to his credit, I don't know many, or if there's another person on the planet that all of a sudden is sending rockets and landing them and building electric cars that seem to be pretty awesome. I don't have one, but I've, whatever. What do you think about somebody like, is that just an anomaly? It's on the side, or what do you think when it comes to culture and a person like him?
There's always an exception, but my spidey sense is tingling. Like, I think there's problems, and
yeah,
I think if we take the long view on that, the idea that he can be absolutely right about all this stuff is, the probability of that is very remote. Right. He has a lot of power because he has a lot of money, but they clearly have some culture problems there. And it is right now, he's exactly at that point where Elizabeth Holmes was in 2014. He's exactly at that point where Travis Kalanick was, around the same time. He's exactly at the point where WeWork was 5 years ago. So if that all kind of falls apart, I don't think anybody's going to say, oh, I'm so surprised. I mean,
wow,
he's interesting. He's interesting. Maybe
I think some would be surprised, considering if you look at like the Tesla stock price, and I know a lot of people say it's super overvalued, but like, I think there would be a lot of people who invest who would be surprised, wouldn't you? I mean, you wouldn't be invested if you thought he was the next Elizabeth Holmes or Travis Kalanick.
A lot of people invested in them at that time too, and
that's true.
That they were the right person. So I don't know. I would prefer to take the Catmull patient long view. Let's see what happens.
Yeah. By the way, this is just for me. How, and maybe it's because you already produced great work, but how do you get access to somebody like Ed Catmull and just go in to visit Pixar and say, I'm like, hey, I'm writing a book? I mean, a lot of people can say I'm writing a book on culture or whatever. How do you get access to Danny Meyer, who I'm going to ask about next, or Ed Catmull, or the others who Navy SEALs, or how were you able to do that?
It varies. I mean, in certain cases, a small literary world ends up helping a little bit. My editor at Random House is Ed Catmull's editor. And so he was able to introduce us. My book agent is Danny Meyer's agent. And so he was able to introduce us. So the idea that these people that run good cultures tend to have those sorts of people. And that's one way. Some of them are harder. The San Antonio Spurs was almost impossible to sort of get a visit with. But here was the thing with them and with some other ones. What ended up creating the conversation was their urge to learn. When I was able to say, hey, I'm doing this project. It's about leadership and culture and being a great teammate. And they're really curious, right? They're RC Buford and these other people are very, very curious. And so that was also, and of course, when I did go to San Antonio, I spent the whole time being interviewed by RC Buford, basically.
Really?
I able to ask him some questions, but he's an amazing person. And he had all kinds of questions about, oh, you've been to these places? Tell me what they're like. Can you introduce me to the Navy SEAL Buds director and all this stuff? So that part of it, because that's what makes them great. Like, they don't, to go back to your first question about the misconception, they don't think that they've got it all figured out, right? Yeah. I mean, they should in some ways, like they should walk around being really confident, but they don't. They walk around being really curious. And so when you say, hey, here's some interesting people you might be able to learn from, they're all in.
That's what blew me away when I was with you guys in Cleveland. I think I've already told you this, but I come in and it's you and Jay Hennessy, who's a longtime Navy SEAL, and Josh Gibson, another brilliant guy. And then in walks Chris, the president of the team, the baseball team. And all of a sudden you guys are asking me questions, and I'm thinking, what's happening? Like, what are we doing here? This is insane. This should be completely one way, meaning me asking you, which we did have a good back and forth since we spent a good amount of time together. But I was blown away by the curiosity of you four in that room, where it was so genuine and so real. You've interviewed hundreds and hundreds of these great performers. We like your podcast. We want to learn. We're curious. And that, I was like, this is why this organization is so good, because of this mentality right here. It blew me away.
Well, it's not, there's a clarity that I think the Guardians have, that I think a lot of good cultures have, which is like, we are, the world we live in is a learning contest. The world we live in is not an execution contest necessarily. It's not a confidence contest. It's a learning contest. What helps you with learning? Like those sorts of attributes where you're continually saying, I think we've got to figure it out right now, but who else can help us? What else is coming around the corner? How can we get better, a little bit better today? And if you like build your values and model that sort of stuff, it ends up being getting better. People always talk a lot about, the culture of purpose and mission and everything else like that. But I think a lot of good cultures have that deeply in common, because maybe 50 years ago, if you're a Ford Motor Company and it's 1935, it's an execution contest. There's certain things you can do to I'm going to be better than you because I have this assembly line. And I'm going to be a big famous law firm because I hired these big shot lawyers. But that's all going away. It's like, it's really a time of flexibility. How do you stay connected and learn is really the question that everybody's facing.
Let's say you're a leader who is either starting a new season, or in the business world, so like in sports, or in the business world, starting potentially a new job, or you have a new team, a new whatever. What are some of the first things that person should do? Last year's over. Like, we were on to this year, whatever. There are changes. Maybe it's personnel, project. You got promoted, perhaps. You go to a new company, whatever it may be. What are some of the first things from a culture perspective that leader should think about when starting new?
Conceptually, think about this question of connection and safety, right? That's the foundation on which all this stuff happens. Without psychological safety, you can be as smart as you want to be, but you will not be able to add up to more than the sum of your parts, because you're not giving people voice. And that's one sort of slight misconception about safety. That word is obviously in the leadership world, and people can sometimes think, well, that means everybody should just feel safe all the time, like feel like you're wrapped in fleece or something. And that's not it. Safety is actually about voice. As Amy Edmondson says, she's sort of a pioneer of psychological safety, who's a professor at Harvard. It is not about making people feel safe. It's actually about making sure that everyone has a voice. So with that sort of concept in mind, I think one of the first things for any new team is to create a space where everyone has voice, where you are building something together, co-creating something together. And one useful thing to co-create is kind of a team charter. Just start out the new year with, all right, old year's gone, new year's starting, new set of challenges. Let's talk about how we're going to work together, what we're going to work toward, what our rules of engagement are going to be. And there's all kinds of tools, and I have some of them in the culture playbook that help you do that. Like, make a one-page kind of user's guide to each person. Everyone reflects, writes a one-pager. I am at my best when, fill it in. I am at my worst when, fill it in. What I need from this team is, fill it in. What I can help this team with is, fill it in. And create that. And then, another idea might be to sort of, let's write that one page. Let's write a team charter. Let's figure out what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. There's one group that's really successful at that is the design firm IDEO, which I know you're a fan of. That every project team, their insight is every project team is sort of like a journey. And so they do these flight meetings. They have a pre-flight meeting, a mid-flight meeting, and a post-flight meeting. And the purpose of each of them is to turn your attention away from the project. Like that's the mistake that a lot of teams do. They just work on the project. And our world is built. Our workflows are built. Our apps are built. Our desks are built to like spotlight focus on the project. Where are we? What are we going to get done? And what they do with these meetings is that they pull that spotlight focus off the project and they put it on the team itself. Like, are we working well together? Those are some of the questions they ask. How might we, what's working, what's not working, and what should we do differently? Like, it's a really simple question, but it's almost like, it's like when a Formula One car, they do go to the pit stops every once in a while, right? Like you don't just race all the time and make the turn and pass the guy. You pull in the pit stops and you say, no, we kind of need some new tires here, or we need more fuel. And so these very simple meetings where you've got the team together and they talk about what are you most excited about? Like, what are you most jazzed about this year in this project? That's such a simple, powerful question to ask. Or ask, like, what do we look like at our best? Like, let's talk about that. Do we have a similar vision of that? Or do I think we're at our best when we're all working solo and you think we're at our best when we're really creative? It's a vulnerability. It's a vulnerable exercise, right? It's hard to have that exercise, but vulnerability is really kind of about visibility. Like, let's create a shared sense of where we are, of our situational awareness with each other so that we can function better as a group.
One of the exercises I do with leadership teams, Dan, is called a user manual. There's a manual for every. There's a user manual for this light, for this camera, for this screen, for this computer, right? There's user manuals for everything except for people, and I've wondered why. Why do we not? So it's a series of prompts and questions followed by then conversations about your user manual. Sometimes you tweak it after you talk about it because, people who've known you for a while say, actually, but my point is it's the process of pausing, as you mentioned, which I think you're really good at, being a thoughtful person, documenting kind of the way that you go, having a conversation about it. Don't you think that team who's focused on their user manual and learning the manuals of others and getting to know them and having dialogue, right? Jay Hennessy is really big on dialogue and talking things out. That's team learning. Peter Senge, the fifth discipline, right? All of that, I think, is a big part of culture building, and people like leave those meetings. I remember them. I just did one with like these huge smiles because they've learned a lot about other people and they've got to share about themselves. And I think it brings people together. And I would imagine the results typically then follow.
100%. I couldn't agree with that more. I mean, and that moment of vulnerability feels weird in a lot of settings, right? Yeah. It feels weird for me to say, here's where I'm at my best, Ryan. Here's where I'm at my worst. Yeah. Like, it feels egotistical. It feels vulnerable, right? It's strange. But that's kind of the weird little group magic that this is tapping into. Like, that pain of exposure or of vulnerability is what brings people together. Like that, it's called a vulnerability loop. But it is not magic. It's like if you think about the people you're closest to in your life, it's not people you're not vulnerable with, right? It's those moments of shared vulnerability create that visibility that lets you function better. And it feels like magic, but it's just like physical exercise, right? Like if you go to work out and you don't feel any pain, it is not a good workout. You did not get stronger. You did not get stronger today. So if you have these group interactions and they're always safe and you never feel risk and you always feel very secure, you are not getting better as a group. You're not in a good group. If you have a meeting and every idea is a good one, you're not in a good group. If you have a meeting and nobody disagrees with anybody, you're not in a good group. But if you're in a meeting where people are actually saying, no, this is what I need from you, and this is what I hope to provide, and this is where I'm bad, and this is where I think you have some work to do. Those are really hard, but that's what makes it strong.
Yep. Like most great things, it's usually hard leading up to the moments, whether it's preparing for a test, a game, a speech, writing a book. It's hard. It's much delayed gratification is very important in that case. But anyway, it's hard. I want to talk for a second about goals, because this is something I personally am all over all over the map. And I know others have seemed to have similar thoughts at times. This mindset of, I'm just going to fall in love with the process and the score will take care of itself, as Bill Walsh might have written about. Yep. Or, no, I'm setting these big, ambitious goals that are very specific and they're very stretched and I've got to go hit those numbers, a number of wins per year, a certain revenue target. So I go back and forth and struggle between, let me just fall in love with the process, surrender the outcome, as my friend Brooke Cups might say, who's written a book with that title, or no, I need to be very specific in these goals with numbers and everything. So where do you fall on that, and what do you think overall about the mindset of goal setting?
I guess I fall in kind of I'm looking for a middle way there, because on the one hand, if you are very specific about those goals and you don't get them, that puts you in a really tough spot, right? Because a lot of times you might not get them for another reason. A lot of people set big goals right before COVID hit and they did not make them. And should they walk around feeling like they didn't reach their goal, or is there another way? And the idea of completely surrendering to the process and not having any North Star out there, to me, seems equally sort of, I don't know that the score will always take care of itself. The way I would think about it is, I guess, what is the directional goal? How can you define your directional goal? Not being specific, but being specific enough to say that you kind of want to be in this neighborhood. You want to give yourself some wiggle room, and it kind of connects back to some of that sort of complexity conversation we were having earlier, because the world is really complex. You can't know what's going to happen, but you can move in a certain direction. And one way to think about it too is with this. There's another idea that I know Jay Hennessy talks about a lot, which is commander's intent, team intent. This idea that you sort of define an end state that you want to get to, and that end state can be, reasonably precise, but it's not 100% precise. It's more like a situation you want to be in. I want to be in a situation where I'm, more comfortable financially. That is sort of a directional goal that we can feel. I want to be in a situation where I'm just traveling a little bit less and more connected to family. Okay, sort of define that end state and move in that direction, without having it be sort of this, sort of Damocles that is over your head, that if you don't get it, life is difficult.
Like, is the goal of the Guardians to win the World Series every year? Does that a stated, written down goal?
It is. That is a goal. That is a goal. And again, that's a hard goal to have. It's good to have out there. But the deeper goal, the deeper purpose of the team is to inspire and unite the city with the power of team. That's the purpose. Are we doing that? That's more directional. That's more all encompassing. And maybe, another point to make here, I think, is that you should have a lot of, I think, having several different things. There's this idea that, like, purpose and goal and mission, we should just have one statement and that's it. Kind of a Jack Welch, like, if we're not this, we're bad. And
we're not playing in that market if we're not one or two or whatever. Yeah,
exactly. And what I see with other successful groups is that they sort of have a whole constellation of things they're moving toward. Right? Are we moving toward winning the World Series? Yes. Are we moving toward inspiring and uniting our city with the power of team? Yes. And so this idea of maybe you want to think in terms of a multiplicity of things, not just kind of like one big thing.
I saw Russell Wilson's press conference when he signed with the Broncos, and I'm paraphrasing, so this isn't a quote, but essentially it was like, I want to play for a decade here, and I hope we win 3 or 4 Super Bowls. Or my plan or my goal is to win 3 or 4 Super Bowls. Like, is that like win the press conference thing? I mean, what do you think about it? Because, like, my thing is, if you're going to play 10 years and your goal is to win a Super Bowl, why not 10 Super Bowls? Or why not have Super Bowl as a goal? Like, I found that kind of bizarre, like 3 or 4, and I think that part is a direct quote, 3 or 4, and I want to play here for a decade. I don't know. That part of it, to me, maybe I'm too focused on this and I should just let it go, but I do think about this as the direction of thinking about how to kind of proceed, and looking at people who have done really well, which he has, is that can I learn something from that?
Right. Right. Boy, I tend to agree. Like if you're gonna put it out there, you may as well just go for it. Three
I
or
mean,
four, it's as hard as 10 in some ways. And yeah, if you're gonna be specific, be real super specific. And if you're not, don't.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, I may be harping on a little point, but I know this is like out of the culture thing, but I think this is something, because it's a more of a philosophy on kind of life and living than it is just on the specifics of goals of like what direction are we headed, and that's why, like most things, life is messy and life is not black and white. It's really gray. And so I think it behooves us to live in the gray and understand the nuance of all of this stuff, as opposed to just being like, it's either that way or it's that way. Most things, not everything, but most things doesn't work like that. It's not just here or there, especially in the world where I feel like some of us, like, or not some of us, but like the world way it's heading, where it's like tribal and over here. I don't like that. I mean, I like to think I'm more of a curious, independent thinker, where there are sometimes, yeah, okay, I'm with you here. And other times I'm like, oh yeah, okay, I'm with you here. But that doesn't seem to always work today with the tribes that are set out.
So true. That's so true. Right. And we're, again, like I think the world is in the grays. That's exactly right. What if Wilson had said, "Hey, I just promise you that I'm going to get better every day. I'm going to do everything I can to get a little bit better tomorrow than I am today."
Which he will. We know he will. That's the type of guy he is. I mean, like that which I'm like, I don't know. So anyway, but I do think words matter. I think from a leadership perspective, words matter. Whether you're a parent, a spouse, a CEO, you're running something, like, we do need to be mindful of what we're saying. And so speaking of that, one of my all-time favorite quotes, Danny Meyer, business, like life, is all about how you make people feel. It's that simple, and it's that hard. I just love that quote. It's so true. You spent a lot of time with Danny Meyer. You covered him, and Setting the Table by him is another great book. What are some of the things, like the key learnings you took away from your time with Danny Meyer?
Boy, he combines. I mean, just to give a little context on him. I mean, he started out. He's a guy out of St. Louis. His dad was in the hospitality industry a little bit. Had a huge falling out, like with his father at some point, and started his own restaurants in the mid 80s, and kind of fitfully, kind of slowly. I think, when I think about his leadership style, it sort of is captured in this story of how he grew. He had one restaurant open, it was very successful. Then he had a second one, and they both started to fail, because when he could be in the room, he could control the culture, like a lot of leaders, right? People knew how to position the salt shaker on the table, because that's how Danny did it. They could see him, right? But all of a sudden, he couldn't be in two restaurants at once, and both restaurants started to go downhill. In fact, they had a waiter insult a customer. The customer didn't like the salmon, and the waiter argued with the customer, like, no, this is how the salmon's supposed to be. Like, you're wrong. This salmon's delicious. And he realized, I've got a problem here, right? And so he closed both his restaurants for a time, and then went off and started trying to make his values explicit, building what later would be called a mantra map. Like, he figured out true north was about creating raves. Talk about the use of language. Creating raves, not serving good food, not making money, not being successful, not a goal of being a 3-star Michelin. That would have been one, right? This is an example of what we were talking about. Creating raves. That's what he wants. Is that a specific goal? Yes, it is. It's pretty specific. Like, are we creating raves or not? Is that a rave, or is that just like a good review? And so that ended up being this North Star that was incredibly effective with him. So really and then he built all these other corny mantras, corny catchphrases, like athletic hospitality, the excellence reflex, This was my favorite one. Mistakes are waves, servers are surfers. That's stupid. Like, it's kind of, but it's also kind of genius. Like, there's a mistake. It's a wave. You have to surf the wave. The road to success is paved with mistakes well handled. Isn't that good? Like he's got a billion of them, and he used them to kind of train and orient the culture in this really explicit way. His use of language, I think, is really sets him apart. Like, he's continually trying to come up with more. I was in his office, and his whiteboard had all kinds of weird sayings about like bridges and monsters, and most of them, it was like, I sort of thought it felt like being in the office of like a country singer in Nashville trying to write country songs, right? Because you got it. It's got to have a truck. It's got to have a dog. It's got to be raining. Like, that's what he's doing in his culture. He's writing songs, really, is a way to think of it. Like, culture is this kind of musical relationship people have with each other, where they're picking up patterns and following models and kind of chasing some North Star. And he's really good at that music. And I think that's an important quality in leadership. The other thing that he's got is he takes his time. Like, when you're with him, you are the only person in the world. He thinks really deeply before he answers. And he also answers in ways that are like disarmingly personal and real. Like, there's a time, and I've never talked about this before, so maybe it'll come off as kind of strange, but he, when he finally like he talked about the process of bringing his team together and starting to build this mantra map and making these things explicit. And I asked, and this is back in the beginning of his career, and I'm like, how did that feel for you? Like, to sort of crack that code, or to sort of figure that out together? He goes, it felt like taking a really good shit. That's what he said. That's what he said. And it was just like, are you kidding me? Like, that is the craziest thing to say, but that's what he said. And I kind of really admire him for it, because he really does kind of make himself very present in the moment in a way that a lot of leaders could have answered that a million different ways. But he is very mindful. There's something kind of Buddhist about his alertness, his attention, and kind of the patient way he is with you. It's kind of magical. He's really an amazing guy.
How do you get that to permeate throughout, especially as an organization grows? And sometimes these places maybe have a cult-like feel, which I know is a little meta considering culture, but like, what do you like that part of when it's small and you have kind of direct influence over most or everybody? I feel like it's probably much easier. But then as you grow and there's multiple locations and people are everywhere and you can't be everywhere all the time, how does that grow beyond kind of your individual sphere of influence beyond and have like ripple effects?
A few thoughts. First of all, it kind of doesn't. You don't have a monoculture when you get past a certain size. And so what you do have instead is a bunch of little ecosystems, a bunch of little microcultures that exist. And Danny and others are comfortable with that. Like, they realize, hey, it shouldn't all feel the same. Like, this restaurant's going to be different than that restaurant. This team's going to be different than that team. And that's actually a strength. That's actually kind of a good, healthy thing. They should have their own mantras. They should have their own models. They should have their own way of doing things. So that's one. The only thing that really scales in culture is that this idea of purpose and North Star. And so they end up really often doubling down and being very explicit and creating a lot of conversations around purpose, around what are we here to do? Because the other things, a lot of elements of culture are relational, and relationships don't scale. Like, yeah, I'm sure people that work at Tesla feel like they know Elon Musk, but you know what? If he did something, that relationship isn't real. That a lot of people at Theranos felt like they really knew Elizabeth Holmes. They didn't. They can't. You can only know 100 or so people. So that's where I think Danny Meyer's attention to language. That's why it's so important, because that's the way in which he can't know these people, but he can create a shared fabric of meaning and understanding on which they're operating. Like he came up with this word skunking, which is when if something goes wrong, you sort of get angry and resentful and sort of create a foul atmosphere in the room, sort of like a skunk spraying. And by defining that and making it part of the language, like what's going on? Oh yeah, that whole, all the dishwashers are skunking right now. Okay, we've just taken a situation that could be interpreted a million different ways. It's totally ambiguous. Maybe, there's a million ways to explain it. And he created language for it. And therefore, words are really, really powerful. And I think that is where you can not exactly exert control over a growing organization, but you can kind of define the direction of its travel. You can sort of say, here's where we should be going, and here's where we shouldn't be going. Like, and create, it's like those poles of energy, right? Where you've got positive over here and negative here. Let's define those poles in language, and then our group can navigate that better.
Yeah. Okay. We didn't bring it up last time we talked, but I was rereading it, and just the $1 billion day when nothing happened. It's just too good of a story. I want to just go over it real quick before, and then I have some notes here on actions to take from the culture playbook. I just think of the quote, "These ads suck." The note that Larry Page wrote and hung up on the wall about Google AdWords. Can you talk to me about the day when Larry Page wrote that note, and it became the $1 billion day when nothing happened? When this quiet, skinny engineer named Jeff Dean saw that and decided to do something about it.
Yeah. There was this huge race. It was kind of like the moon, race for the moon or something, between all these companies in the early 2000s. And the race was who could combine effective ads with internet search terms, right? Like if you could do that, you could open up this massive advertising market. And there was a company in existence named Overture that they were way ahead. If it was the moon launch, they had already launched satellites. They had some people who had invented the software on which these early efforts were based. They had tons of venture capital money, tons of resources, huge campus. And if you had to bet on who was going to crack this first and optimize it and maximize it, it was going to be this company Overture. And over here, you had 100 or so people working at this startup called Google, with a guy named Larry Page, who was in charge at the time. And they were also trying to do this on a kind of a shoestring sort of situation, with gum and chewing gum and wire. And they had an early effort where you would post a search, and then it would show the ads that this search generated. And so Larry Page looked at that, and they were bad. And so he printed out the bad ads, poorly matched ads, and he wrote in big letters, "These ads suck," and posted it in the dining room, in the kitchen, where everybody could see it. And there was a guy working there named Jeff Dean, and he wasn't even working on the AdWords project. He was working on a completely different project. But that signal inside that culture, that honesty about it, that's sort of Danny Meyer, like, here's what's really going on. Like, it would have been really easy for Larry Page to be like, well, that's a good try, guys. Let's try to be a little bit better next time. Good luck. But instead, he did this extraordinary, transparent thing, which is, pretty honest to sort of say, this sucks. This isn't where we want to go. And that signal sort of activated something in Jeff Dean. And this is where you get to that, again, that sort of complexity thing. You can't plan for these sorts of moments. You can't treat them as linear cause and effect. You have to send out, signals and attractors and see what happens. And that's exactly what Larry Page did. He sent out this thing, and Jeff Dean saw it and then spent 2 nights trying to fix it. And he did fix it. And he had such breakthroughs that it became the basis of Google's kind of their entire business, really. They're an advertising company. Like so many. That's how they make money, is with surveillance advertising. And that was the moment. And nobody assigned it to Jeff Dean. Nobody knew he was working on it. It wasn't part of his job. Like, it was just a day. It was just a day with this sign in the kitchen and somebody who was curious, to go back to your earlier point, somebody who was curious enough to say, I wonder if that kind of connects to something I'm working on. Let me give that a shot. What the heck? And ends up changing the history of, really of technology in America and the world.
And then how about when he's asked about it after the fact, he can hardly even remember. He's like, oh yeah. Like, it was like not that big of a deal. It's like, it's just that's just what we do. Or that's just what I do. Like, it wasn't fake humility. It was just genuine. Like, oh yeah. Like, he didn't even fully realize of what he'd done.
That's right. And I think that's how, if you talk to Navy SEALs after a successful mission, or you talk to people in Danny Meyer's restaurant, or you talk to anybody, there is this sense that you have in a culture of, I'm part of this bigger thing. I'm playing my role. It's not me. It's this dynamic between people. And it's really cool when you see it. And I think a lot of us have felt it at one time or another. Like, if you made a great play in your football career, you wouldn't say, look at my great play. You'd say, oh, great blocking. That guy ran a great route. We had the right play call. All of these things came together, and that's what creates great group performance. And tuning into those connections and those kind of subtle feelings of like, hey, this is just another day, and it feels good to do that. I mean, that's why Jeff Dean did it, because it felt cool and it felt good, and he felt like he could have an impact.
And he was curious, right? Yeah. Like a superpower of a trait when looking to hire. I don't see many jobs where, if you have a genuine intellectual curiosity to perhaps solve a problem, that is just a top of the list when I'm looking for somebody for most roles, certainly for the role that he had. Okay, the culture playbook. I want to focus on a few actions for people to take. One, I want you to expand on is scheduling regular tune-ups. What does it mean to schedule a regular tune-up?
Yeah, when you got, we have this world we're living in where it's just all about productivity, where it's like, we have a project to do. We're always put on teams. We're always trying to move that workflow, build our workflows for maximum productivity, optimize and maximize. And a team tune-up is when you say, stop. How are we doing? What is exciting us most about this? It was sort of a Jeff Dean moment. What are we curious about right now? Mm-hmm. How can I help the team work better? What am I doing wrong? What am I doing right? What are we doing wrong? What are we doing right? There's a woman named Roshi Gavecci, who I've written about, who worked at IDEO. And she was a genius at this. They would bring her in to kind of stop teams and tune them up. And she would just ask these really simple question, like, what are you most excited to learn? And just pausing and doing that's sort of a tune-up. And we've talked about a little bit earlier, this IDEO model, I think, is the most powerful way to do that, where you do a pre-flight, a mid-flight, and a post-flight. Mm-hmm. And that moment, and I give a few ideas in the books on how to do it, but I think my favorite ones are mortems. Like, if you do a pre-mortem and a post-mortem. And the pre-mortem would be in the pre-flight, where you would ask the team, if this fails, if this just goes off the rails and we completely fail, and we're 2 years into the future or 1 year into the future, what will we look back and say, well, that's the cause of it? What caused it? Like, if we fail, what caused it? And that is such a cool question, because it actually makes you, like all good questions, it makes you zoom out and see yourself from a different, higher perspective and say, oh yeah, if we don't work with these three other departments on this rollout, we're not gonna make it. It gives you a view of the barriers you face. And in the world today, we tend to focus a lot on our goals, and we tend to focus a lot on our skills, and we naturally focus a lot on ourselves. And that question, zooming out and saying, let's define the barriers that we face, and creating that situational awareness, let's call it. every good athlete, every good team has great situational awareness, and asking that pre-mortem question gives you that. And then there's the post-mortem at the end where you say, all right, let's break this down a little bit. Let's talk about what went well, what didn't go well, and what we should do differently.
Yep. So much learning. I love going back, for example, when I do like off-sites, I regularly go back and look at the notes of the pre and post of what were we trying to do, and then the post, as well as feedback from the people who attended. Years of worth of those that I look back on. It's so helpful. Like in the moment, you got to document what happened, what went well, what didn't, how are we feeling, right? That type of thing in the moment is when you document it, so that you'll be able to use that for a long time. It's really good.
Jack Nicklaus used to do he'd shoot around a golf, and he would immediately go to the practice range. Why is that? Because exactly what you just described. That is where you have your most effective practice, because your mistakes and successes are freshest in your mind. You remember what it felt like, and that immediacy is super important.
Trust, building trust. The foundation for any relationship, Dan, obviously, is that we trust each other, and it's critical in an excellent culture. What are some of the playbooks, the plays from this book that we can implement in order to build trust? One, if let's say we're still like in the early stages, and maybe even two, maybe it's been broken before. Maybe we've messed up. What are some things that we can do?
Yeah, signaling fallibility is really important. We tend not to do that in our life because we don't like risk, we don't like exposure. And yet, especially for leaders, especially for any position of authority, that moment of saying, hey, here's where I need your help. Here's what I don't know. Here's where this is weak. I need you to poke some holes in this. Like, help me out here. It's such a small signal, but it's such a powerful signal because it gives everybody permission to dig in together and to actually expose the weakness. We have such a bias to hide our own weaknesses and to hide our team weaknesses. And we finish a project, and it's very tempting just to kind of like, well, let's shake hands and move on to the next one, right? But pausing, taking that minute to reflect together and say, yeah, I think we really were a B- on this, and I think here's what we can do to move it up to an A, is incredibly powerful. And another thing that I think that can create that moment of trust and vulnerability is something I call the subtraction game. The world is really good at giving us more to do, right? I would call it the disease of more. And I think every organization is suffering from it because just the nature of the system in which we live, the nature of the environment in which we live, is that there's always more. There's always more. And so our plates are continually piling up with new tools, new processes, new readings we have to do, new podcasts we have to listen to, like everything, right? And I think good cultures do a vulnerable thing and a trust building thing where they say, let's subtract. Let's take some things off the plate. And the subtraction game is one way to do that, where you sort of say, hey, get the team together and say, hey, what have we done for a long time but is no longer useful? Let's name some things. What was once useful but is now adding needless friction? Let's name those things. It's a short meeting, right? But you can co-create, and that's such an important word on a lot of this cultural stuff. It's not like the leader is just going to announce that, okay, we're no longer using Trello or whatever. It's that you're co-creating and creating sort of shared awareness and figuring stuff out together. That's really the moment, this vulnerability loop, when you have people get together and really kind of get real with each other. It creates a space for you to figure things out together. Like that's what happens inside that vulnerability loop. You're actually, let's take a look at what's really happening and let's figure it out.
Dan, so good, man. Let's say there's somebody who's reaching out for help, and maybe this is even one of your kids, considering the ages now that they are. Earlier in their career, perhaps they just graduated college, and they're trying to figure things out. They know they want to do good, right? They want to leave a positive dent in the world. What are some general pieces of life/career advice you'd give to that person?
Yeah, I think it's an idea that I am stealing from Dave Epstein, who wrote Range, but it's something I've talked about with my own kids as they moved into the work world, which is sort of think in terms of experiments and keep a book of experiments. Like write down and reflect on, if you're curious to sort of check a certain area out or a certain kind of job, like don't just sit around and imagine what it would be like, but actually spend some time. If you're curious about healthcare, go be a candy striper in a hospital for a while. If you're, curious about being a fireman, go see if you can shadow for the day. Like you'd be surprised how many people are open to those sorts of experiences when you just say, hey, can I just learn about your work? Most people will say, sure. And this idea of having an experiment, a real world interaction with this domain that you want to explore, and then write about it. Like stop, think, reflect, process. All learning happens in a loop, right? You have experience and then you have reflection. You have experience and then you have reflection. And we often underrate the reflection part. Like we sort of run through our lives, experience, and we're constantly gathering. But actually to stop, pause, process, figure out what was I responding to there? What direction should I travel? And so doing experiments in a direction, I guess, is a really important thing. And as you go through that, to be patient. I mean, it's such a cliche, but if you're not struggling in your 20s, you're not doing it right. Like that's what I think. Like if anybody's going through, Adam Grant is really good on this. He gives a lot of career advice to his students. And when somebody comes in and says, I know exactly what I'm doing for the next 10 years, that's the worst sign, right? Certainty? Are you kidding? Like if you really have that mapped out, you are deluding yourself. You don't have a clear vision of yourself or the world. Like, because that's not how the world is built. That's probably not how you're built. And so this idea, and there's another book that I've given to some people in their 20s, which is called Designing Your Life. It's a good set of exercises and reflections for kind of thinking about what experiments you want to do and what lights you up. And it's a nice tool for that time in life.
The question in interviews, what is your 5-year plan, or what do you hope? I've found that to be bizarre, man. Like I'm the worst at answering that question. What do you think of that as a question in the interview process?
It's not, if every question, is a gateway to whatever the answerer wants, in some way. And so I don't think it's a great question necessarily. You can answer it in some really interesting ways. You can start talking about scenarios. You can start saying, I have 10 different scenarios that I've been thinking about, right? I could see this playing out in different ways based on these forces, right? But it doesn't speak super well of the questioner if they are themselves just talking all the time about my 5-year plan, my 7-year plan, and my 10-year plan. Like,
yeah,
really?
I think that's hard because one of the ways I've answered is like I know what I'm committed to doing right now is I will work very hard to follow what I'm most curious about and hope that it helps people. And when I've done that, Dan Coyle might send a text saying, well, you want to come hang out with the Cleveland baseball team, right? The president and all the guys. How could that have been a part of my 5-year plan, right? And that would have led to the team's call with Jay and then the relationship and a lot of other things, right? All those things happen because of that one kind of North Star guiding point of I'm going to work really hard to follow what I'm curious about, to try to be very prepared, and then hopefully it helps people. And if that happens, the opportunities, I don't know, they're almost endless, as weird and kind of bad catchphrase as that sounds. That's how this has gone. And I'd imagine that if I stay committed to that it should continue to happen.
I agree. That's how the universe is built. It's complex. It's not just Legos, right? There's energy and there's patterns and there's magnets. And it's like that stuff is just going to keep exploding. So the better question, I think, is about habits and behaviors.
Yep.
Like, I don't want to know about your plan. I want to know what you did last Tuesday morning Or I want to know what you did to prepare for this conversation. Let's talk about that. Like, that's a real question, where if somebody goes, yeah, I'm kind of winging it, like that says something. And if somebody says, no, here's exactly, I looked at these models and I've been thinking about this for a while, and here's the different ways I prepared. I mean, it's called behavioral interviewing. That's kind of the formal thing, but that's why it's important, because it actually is specific, concrete, and you can actually talk about it.
By the way, I should have said this earlier. So you've done some work with Insight Global. I know Bert being their CEO. I think you've spoken and worked with them a little bit. Bert was at a conference. This is just kind of harkening back to this, like, you never know what's going to happen. Bert was at a conference with a bunch of CEOs, and another one of them came over to him because Bert's like, we're really trying to rebuild our culture. I think he was a new CEO at the time, trying to rebuild our culture, try to do some things. And some random guy I still don't even know, said, you should listen to Dan Coyle. It's episode 242 on the Learning Leader Show. I think it'll be helpful for you. And obviously read the book and stuff, all that too. So Bert listened and really liked it and decided to continue to listen, and has listened to most episodes since then. And a year ago, I started working with other senior leaders, Sam Kaufman, who's their chief revenue officer, 2 years ago now. A year ago, we came into like a formal partnership, similar probably to what you have with the Guardians. And that kind of magic would have never happened if you and I wouldn't have had that conversation, and it would have impressed him enough to say, I want to continue listening. And he listened, and he became, I think, a fan over the course of years, to the point where it's like, we need to work together. Right. And that has been the best partnership I could have ever had. So it's just amazing the way the world works, man. It's like hard to fully predict, but 242 will forever be a special one to me, because I had no idea. I was just trying to be prepared about the culture code. That's it. You show up and you hope it goes well. No idea it's going to lead to what it did, and now here we are. So it's just wild. Of how the world can work sometimes if you try to work hard and be prepared and meet the moment, I think.
Super cool. Love that.
Isn't it? So cool.
So
what's that?
It's not magic. It feels like magic, but down deep, it's not magic.
No. The book's The Culture Playbook 60. We only covered like 60 highly effective actions to help your group succeed. I highly, highly recommend people get this. Obviously, if you like the culture code, you're going to love this. It's an amazing follow-up, and it's very practical. You can put it into action today. Start doing the things today, and then it will help you achieve the results you want from a culture perspective. So Culture Playbook, I highly recommend it. Dan, obviously, I'm so grateful for you, and we'll certainly continue our dialogue as we both progress, man.
Me too. Hope to see you soon, Ryan. Thanks for having me. Great conversation.
Thanks, man.